Guess what, CEOs? It's episode 400. And I want you to know, this podcast wasn't successful right out of the gate. For the first season, I hit publish week after week, and not once did it bring $1 into my business. In the next season, it led to launching a program with 30 women on the wait list, but only one person joining. And in those moments, I honestly wondered if I had completely missed what God was asking me to do. But those failed seasons ended up revealing the message that would shape the current season of the Redeem Her Time podcast. So, to celebrate 400 episodes and counting, today I'm taking you behind the scenes of the journey that led to Redeem Her Time. And I have a feeling you're going to see yourself too along the way and learn a thing or two from what God was showing me as He was shaping me. I remember that day standing at baggage claim in the airport after a missions trip halfway across the world, opening doors to a program I had been working on for months. Over 30 women had joined the wait list. I felt confident, excited, certain that this was the direction that God was leading. So, right there from the airport, I sent the email. I opened the doors and I waited. And a few weeks later, only one woman had joined. Yes, just one. I remember wondering, did I hear you wrong, God? What I didn't realize in that moment was that God wasn't closing a door. He was just refining the assignment. And that moment would eventually lead to the message this podcast now carries. So today is episode 400 of the Redeem Her Time podcast. And looking back over the past 6 years, I can see something I couldn't see while I was living it. What felt like 3 different podcasts were actually 3 seasons God used to refine the same calling. But before we jump in, I want to celebrate episode 400 with something special. So I decided I'm giving away a free one-on-one CEO strategy session. This is a private power hour with me, where we identify an area of business or life to optimize. We could map out a focused goal or flesh out a strategic idea so you can grow with greater stewardship. This is the same type of power hour I normally reserve only for private clients. But guess what? You get in on it today. So here's how to enter. Just leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Take a screenshot, then post that screenshot inside the Redeem Her Time community under the featured episode 400 post. Now, if you've already left a review or don't have access to Apple Podcasts, simply share this podcast with a friend or on social and tell us why you love it. Then post that screenshot inside the community. At the end of the week, we're going to draw one winner from that's going to get this time and business strategy shaping session. But honestly, the bigger win is going to be getting you connected with incredible women inside the Redeem Her Time community when you post your screenshot. That way, we can hear about your business journey. So feel free right now to hit pause, scroll down to where it says leave a review, and do so now. All right, you ready to take a look at the journey that brought us here? Season 1 was called Repurposed After 40. When I first launched the podcast, it was called Repurposed After 40. The vision was simple, to interview midlife women about how God was using experiences from the first half of life in the second. Some stories were about success, many were about hardship, but every story carried the same message. God wastes nothing, and He can redeem anything. Let me tell you how this podcast actually even started, because it definitely was not strategic. I didn't start with fancy tech. I didn't start with a podcasting plan. Honestly, I had never even listened to a podcast. It's true. One day, I was doing a Facebook Live interview with another business owner, and at the end, she asked me a simple question. Do you put these interviews on a podcast? To which I said, no, mostly because I had never thought about podcasting before. But in about 3 minutes, she showed me how to take the audio file and upload it as a podcast episode. And just like that, I was off and running. No overthinking, no complicated strategy, just conversations with women about how God was repurposing their lives. I would interview them on Facebook Live and then repurpose the audio for the podcast. Looking back now, I realized something else about that season. I never once measured the ROTI, the return on time invested. And I was definitely not managing my time well and probably overworking a lot. But what I was doing was learning to listen, learning to teach, learning to ask better questions, learning how God uses stories to show women that nothing in life is wasted. And in many ways, that first season was also about my own story. You see, I went from teaching in a school to being a teacher online. I went from teaching kids to teaching women. And in between there, I was teaching my own kids at home. And when they transitioned to public school and I went back to subbing and tutoring, then that's when COVID hit and something shifted. I suddenly realized I didn't want to go back into the classroom. So instead of teaching those kids in the classroom who sometimes talked back, I started teaching women online who wanted to be there, Although, to be fair, some of them still didn't always do their homework. But that shift helped me realize something important. God had been preparing me all along. The teaching, the mentoring, the conversations. But looking back now, I can see that what felt like simple conversations were actually the beginning of the message that God was forming. You see, God often begins shaping our calling with something that seems very ordinary. That simple conversation, that unexpected opportunity, a skill maybe you've used for years or not even thought about before. In fact, it reminds me of the question that God asked Moses in Exodus 4, verse 2. What's in your hand? It's simple. What's already in your hand? Moses is holding a staff, just an ordinary tool that he used every day as a shepherd. But in God's hands, that ordinary thing became part of an extraordinary calling. And I think that's often how God works with us too. He starts with what we already carry, our experiences, our struggles, our expertise, even the seasons of life we thought were detours. The time we already lived often becomes the very foundation for what God calls us to next. And at the time, I didn't realize it, God was also beginning to shape how I understand the value of time as I stepped into midlife and started to number my days. Then we have season 2, Simplified Focus. As the podcast continued to grow, I began sensing that God was shifting the focus again. In that first season, I was interviewing women and sharing their stories. But more and more, I started noticing a pattern in the conversations I was having with the women I served. They were overwhelmed. They were trying to do too many things in too many areas of life. Trying to grow a business, trying to serve their families well, trying to show up for everyone who needed them. And yet, feeling like they were busy all the time, but not actually moving forward in the things that mattered most. Around that time, a passage from Luke 10 kept coming to mind. The story of Mary and Martha, you remember? Where Jesus gently tells Martha, 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 insert your name. You are anxious and troubled about many things. And I began realizing that many of the women I was serving felt exactly like that. Pulled in 100 directions, a lot of good things, but missing out on the best things because they were trying to carry too many things at once. So the podcast began to shift into a new season called Simplified Focus. Instead of interviews, I began teaching about how to simplify and focus across 8 key areas of life. Faith, family, friendships, work and service, stewardship, wellness, passions, and dwelling. Because when every area feels important, it's easy to try to do everything at once and end up going nowhere because you're scattered. One of the things I kept hearing from women during that season was some version of the same sentence. I just need more hours in the day, Lissa. They were juggling businesses, families, responsibilities at church, friendship, home, and trying to do all of it well. And yet, I felt like they were constantly behind. Can you relate? I remember one conversation with a woman who was trying to grow her business while raising kids and volunteering at church. And she looked at me and said, Lissa, I feel busy all the time, but I don't feel like I'm really going anywhere. And honestly, I could relate. There were many seasons of my own life where I felt stretched in 100 directions, trying to do all the things, trying to serve everyone well, trying to keep up with everything that felt important. And what I began realizing was the problem wasn't just physical clutter or a lack of productivity systems. The real clutter was often mental and spiritual. It was the weight of trying to carry too many responsibilities at once, too many priorities competing for the same limited time. And that's when something started becoming really clear to me, that time stewardship is always spiritual before it's practical. Because before we figure out how to organize our schedules, we have to get clear on what actually matters, what God is asking us to carry in this season, and what He isn't. That's why the Simplified Focus message resonated so deeply with so many women. They weren't just looking for better time management. They were longing for clarity on what to even give their time to. And when I opened the waitlist for that Simplified Focus program, those more than 30 women who were on it, I remember thinking, okay, God, this is it. Then I left for that missions trip halfway around the world. And when I came back, I opened enrollment early from the airport waiting for my luggage. And then when the cart closed, a few weeks later, one woman had joined. Just one. I remember that day I was so excited. I was ready to see what was going to happen. And I had expectations that at least a few of those women were going to join, maybe 10, 15. After all, there were 30 who had already raised their hand and said, yes, I want this. So why was it that after several weeks and lots of good follow-up, it was still just one woman? I don't think I've ever felt such a mix of confusion and disappointment at the same time. I remember my heart sank, my stomach flipped, and I remember letting out a very honest sigh. I found myself asking God a question I hadn't dared to ask in a while. Did I hear you wrong? I wondered if I had misread the direction He was giving me. Had I been chasing my own ideas of success instead of his? That one moment, that single enrollment, sent me into a week of fasting and praying. Because suddenly, the question wasn't just about whether a program had worked. It was much bigger. Much bigger. I found myself asking God a question that went deeper than business, teaching, or time management. God, what do you actually want me to focus on? And what do women really need to hear? I didn't have an answer right away, but I knew this. Something inside me was shifting. The clarity that I'd been looking for wasn't going to come from numbers or enrollments. It was going to come from a quiet, obedient conversation with him. And in that week of seeking him, everything began to change. Now, before I tell you the rest of the story, I just want to say, if this episode has encouraged you or sparked you a new way of thinking about your time or your business growth journey, then here is a simple way to multiply that impact. One of the best ways to help more women discover this podcast and the message of redeeming their time is to leave a review. And when you leave a review, you'll also be entered to win a free CEO strategy session. That is, if you post the screenshot so I can see what you said. You're going to get a private power hour. One woman will get a private power hour with me where you can identify that area of your business, that focused goal, or that strategic idea that you want to invest time in and see results. And even better, when you do post your review or share that podcast with a friend and share the screenshot inside the Redeem Her Time community, you're not just entering a giveaway. You're helping other women hear the message and take steps towards stewarding their time with God and seeing raw results. So check the show notes or the featured episode 400 post inside the community for all the details. All right, back to our story. After that week of seeking the Lord, something had happened that changed everything. I was sitting in church trying to pay attention. I promise I was paying attention when the words suddenly jumped off the page from Ephesians, redeem the time. It was like the Holy Spirit whispered directly to my heart, this is it. Women don't just need better productivity systems, they need a redeemed relationship with time. And it started to make sense in a way that it never had before. You see, earlier that week, I'd had a random conversation in a Zoom room with a new connection. She asked me, almost casually, Lissa, have you ever considered putting faith at the center of how you talk about time? And then later, walking into church, I asked a friend how her week had been. She smiled, that pasted on smile that said, oh, just staying busy. But her eyes told me the truth. There was a weariness there, a longing, a sense of running on empty. I remember sitting down the pew saying, really, Lord, is this really what you desire for us? And it was that day, sitting in that pew, as the sermon moved through Ephesians, that suddenly Ephesians 5:15-16 came alive, which says, look carefully how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time, or making the best use of it, because these are difficult days. I remember grabbing my bulletin, and right there on the back of it, literally in the pew, Redeem Her Time was born. I began taking a stand against the pressure to just get better at managing time like the world says we should. Because as believers, our time looks different. It's not about squeezing more into the day. It's about partnering with the author of time to steward what he has given us. Now, when I sat there that day, I knew this was it before I even opened my mouth and started talking to women. And here's the thing, as soon as I did, they started flocking. God had clearly said that time stewardship is what it's all about, and it starts with faith. You see, it's spiritual first, before it's practical, before the planners, before the systems, before the to-do lists or the programs. And once that became clear, and I looked back at my own journey and that diagnosis of hystericus globus I had, everything began to shift. At first, this message was for any busy woman out there, but over time, God refined it again, narrowing it down to the women I feel most called to serve, Christian women business owners. Women who aren't just managing schedules, they're stewarding callings, stewarding businesses, and stewarding kingdom impact. That shift became the foundation for everything I teach today. The Redeem Her Time Planner and the Intentional Year course that comes with it, CEO Focus, where I help women map out 12-week goals, align their time with priorities, and walk them out strategically, and then CEO Impact and CEO Scale programs, which help give women the tools, the systems, and the frameworks to go from scattered to scaling, from growing both their time and the results. And as a result, I get to teach women every single day how to see their time as a kingdom asset, not just a resource to manage. And as women step into this way of thinking, the transformation is so incredible to watch. They're no longer just checking boxes on a to-do list. They're making strategic decisions. They're multiplying results. They're growing in faith and business at the same time. And this is why I can honestly say Redeem Her Time has become more than a podcast. It's a movement. It's a place where women are learning to walk in kingdom rhythms, to steward their time and see God multiply their impact. And that's exactly what this 400th episode is all about. looking back at the journey, seeing how God has refined the calling, and celebrating the women whose lives he's touching along the way. So as I look back over these 400 episodes, there are 3 lessons that stand out. Lessons that I hope you can see yourself in too. Lesson 1, God clarifies calling through obedience. You see, I didn't discover this message sitting still and waiting for it to come to me. It came through walking, publishing episodes, serving women, having conversations, following the next nudge from God, even when I didn't fully understand where it was going to lead. Maybe you felt that too, like God is asking you to step forward, even when the path isn't super clear. You see, it's in the doing, not in the waiting, that clarity comes. Lesson number 2 is that fruitfulness rarely looks like what we expect. You see, at that time, that airport moment, when only one woman jumped in the program, I felt like a failure. I know what it's like to measure success by numbers, results, or what we think should happen. But looking back, I now see it differently. That moment was actually redirection. If the program had filled with 30 women, this message, the one behind Redeem Her Time, might never have been born. So maybe God is asking you to trust the invisible work that he's doing, even when the results feel small or delayed. And lesson 3, time stewardship is spiritual before it's practical. You see, the world talks about time management, but Scripture calls us to redeem the time. Time management asks, how can I get more done? Time redemption says, God, what actually matters today? When we start with faith, our to-do lists become a tool, not a master. Our calendars become a way to steward purpose, not just the minutes. And that shift from doing more to redeeming well, that changes everything. So as you listen to this episode, I want you to think about your own life and business. Where are you walking in obedience? Where has God redirected what you thought was failure? And where might he be inviting you to redeem your time differently today? And before we wrap up this 400th episode, there's one thing I want you to hear, especially if you've ever felt behind, overwhelmed, or like you wasted your time. After 400 episodes, here's what I know for sure. Time is never just about minutes and hours. It's about calling. It's about stewardship. It's about walking closely enough with God that we stop asking, how can I fit more into my day, and start asking, God, what matters most today? Because when we walk with him, even the seasons that feel confusing, even the moments that look like failure, even the time we think we've wasted, he redeems it. And looking back now, that airport moment that once felt like failure was actually the beginning of the message that God wanted me to carry. And if he can redeem our time, imagine what he can do with the rest of our story. So if this podcast has encouraged you, I'd love for you to be part of celebrating episode 400. Leave a review, take a screenshot, and post it inside the Redeem Her Time community under the featured episode 400 post. Or remember, go share it with a friend or your social and screenshot that and share it as well. And if you've already left that review, then you're just going to be sharing why you love this podcast and posting that inside so we can see it. And then at the end of the week, one woman is going to win a free CEO strategy power session with me. So be sure you check back in the community in case it's you. But even more importantly, you're going to be joining a community of women learning to steward their time with God. And that's exactly why this podcast exists, to help you stop chasing time and start redeeming it with him. And if there's a woman in your life who feels stretched, busy, or called to more, this might be the episode she needs to hear and get introduced to Redeem Her Time. Okay, friend, I'll see you over inside the Redeem Her Time community. We'll talk more about this. Thanks for joining me for this episode. Until next time, remember, instead of chasing time on a clock, trying to control it, receive the gift of time from the one who truly holds it. Because as his daughter, you have time.